Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll meet Northwest Angle explorer Joe Lauren. But first, our guest today is here to talk about Child Abuse Prevention Month, which is in April. And let's welcome Quinn Jager, the Clay County Social Services Supervisor in Moorhead, Minnesota. Quinn, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
As we get started, tell the folks a little bit about yourself and maybe your background, where you're from.
Sure. I grew up in North Fargo, graduated from Fargo North High School. I'm a Spartan. I attended college at MSUM over in Moorhead, where I got a Bachelor of Social Work degree. I've been with Clay County since 2016. I did investigations there for a few years and then took the supervisor position.
What got you interested in doing this kind of work?
I joke that my mom is a social worker, so from a very young age, I feel she was planting seeds in my brain to make me a social worker. So when I got to college, I kind of realized that that was the goal, that was the dream, to help people, and that's how I got started.
Well, you're here to talk about, of course, April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. When did it start and why?
It started in the 80s, and it was designed to create awareness for child abuse that was occurring in not only our community, but everywhere in the United States.
Yeah. What's sort of the plan for this month, for April, for the observance? Do you do anything really special or just outreach, or what are you doing?
Yeah, try to do as much community outreach as possible. Just raise everyone in the community's awareness that child abuse and child neglect does occur. Even when you think it doesn't happen in your community, it unfortunately does. We just kind of want to educate the community on what it is and what they can do to help reduce or stop it altogether.
Yeah, do providers, do y'all do anything really different during the month to help with outreach and programs, or is it business as usual but just a little added influence to it?
Sure. The day-to-day services don't change in terms of how we're impacting and engaging with families throughout the community, but we like to do different campaigns from year to year. Some years we've put blue ribbons up at the county building just to get people asking questions. What are those for? Hanging them around trees. We'll rent a billboard that will kind of advertise that it's Child Abuse Prevention Month in Clay County, typically right on the corner of First Avenue and 11th Street.
Mm-hmm. What are ways people can be more aware maybe during the month? You're going to try to make them aware, but then what can people do?
Sure. I guess just ask questions. We have our child abuse website up on our Clay County website. People can go there to get themselves educated on what abuse and neglect is, and they're always free to call us at our offices and ask any questions that they might have about what they're seeing with kids in the community.
Yeah, we're going to, obviously COVID comes into play for anything we talk about, it seems like, here on Prairie Pulse. But, what's your job been like during the COVID months? It's been a year now, basically. In fact, we tried to do an interview last year about this time, and we missed out because of COVID. But so how has it changed, or what's been going on in terms of investigating child abuse or neglect?
Sure. Luckily, our staff have had some exemptions in terms of our statutory requirements of what we need to do when we open cases. However, a lot of cases, my investigators want to get out into the homes, get out into the community, and make sure that kids are safe. So what I mean when I say exemptions is, prior to the COVID pandemic, we weren't able to use things like technology in order to assess for safety. We weren't able to use a Zoom call or a Teams meeting. We are able to do that now in some circumstances, but if the reported concern is particularly dangerous for a child, we are still getting out there face-to-face, knocking on the family's door, saying, hey, can you kind of tell us what's going on here? So COVID definitely has impacted us, but the good news is that my investigators don't like to use that exemption. We take all the necessary safety precautions, we have our masks on, we maintain social distancing when we're able to, but still they want to get out into the homes and make sure that kids are safe.
Has your office seen an increase in cases due to COVID, I guess I'm going to say, but with COVID in play?
Sure. Our overall numbers for calls have decreased. That has a lot to do with the fact that kids weren't in school in person for quite a significant amount of time. However, the cases that we've seen are more severe. They're more significant. It just seems like everybody is struggling. All the families out there are really struggling to deal with the impacts of COVID. So the overall numbers have decreased, but the severity of what we've seen has increased.
Well, then what I just heard you say then, with kids going back to school full time, are you seeing cases increase? Because now I'm putting an assumption there that teachers and counselors recognize it, and so am I correct in what I'm saying?
You are correct. The numbers are ticking back up now that kids are back in person. You know, most of the time kids have a very strong support person in someone that they communicate with at the school, typically their teacher, school social worker, school counselor. With kids being back in person and having those, you know, providers be able to have face-to-face contact with the kids, we are seeing that the teachers and school social workers are hearing about things that are happening at home that would constitute abuse and neglect.
With that said, what exactly is the definition of child abuse?
Sure. Kind of a loaded question, but I'll do my best. You know, abuse is defined by statute as unreasonable or excessive discipline. That's physical abuse. There are also many different categories of what we refer to as maltreatment. You know, so when you say abuse, we just refer to it as overall maltreatment. That kind of incorporates all abuse and neglectful behavior. There's many different types of abuse and of neglect. So it really depends. I could take the whole interview explaining each and every allegation that exists. But ultimately, it's a standard that's defined by statute. So it's not like, you know, you or I could just look at a situation and say, oh, I don't like how that particular person is parenting. It's got to meet a statutory threshold.
Who determines that threshold? Is there any gray area, I guess, in that? Is it hard to determine sometimes?
Absolutely. You know, making that determination on whether or not our Clay County social workers are going to have an intervention with the family is most often the most gray decision that we make every single day. We have our state statute that's, you know, passed by the legislature, and then we also have the Minnesota Department of Human Services that gives us what we call screening guidelines. They kind of expand on what abuse and neglect is and provide different examples as to what would be acceptable versus not acceptable behavior. So we're taking the reports that the community makes, and we're kind of comparing the information in those reports with those guidelines and trying to make that determination, is that above or below that threshold.
Mm-hmm. Well, if an investigator suspects child abuse or you've been informed, what's sort of the next steps?
Sure. So it depends on our response. We have what's called a family investigation, which is generally considered your more traditional child protection response. We have 24 hours to lay eyes on the child and their immediate caregivers to make sure that they're safe right now in this moment. We also have what's called a family assessment, which is still significant. I mean, it's an allegation that met the criteria for a response, and we have 120 hours to physically see the child and assess for their immediate safety. So once we've done that, we will, you know, speak to the caregivers of the child, whether that's mom and dad, whether that's grandma, grandpa, an uncle, an aunt, somebody else, and kind of just say what is happening in the family right now. Tell us everything that you can. We try to stay as strengths-based as possible. It's really easy to just go out and judge someone's parenting, but it's a lot harder to say, you know, you are doing something well, and that's what we want to identify, and that's what we want to build off of.
Now, you said you were an investigator. Does that help you in your supervision job?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. The fact that I have done the cases that that my staff are going out to do is extremely helpful.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit about it, but you know, are there certain legal steps that have to be taken?
Yes, absolutely. Every report that we receive is also cross-reported to law enforcement. Oftentimes when child abuse or child neglect happens, a crime was also committed. So we will work a joint investigation together with our law enforcement partners, basically so that kids and families don't have to tell their story more than once. It would be quite terrible if a child has to disclose an abusive or neglectful situation to a law enforcement officer, and then the next day have the social worker come knock on the door and say, hey, tell me everything that you just told that law enforcement officer yesterday. So we work these cases jointly so that the families can be impacted as little as possible.
Well, with that, what's a mandated reporter?
Sure. A mandated reporter is anyone that's typically in a helping profession that, due to their typically code of ethics, they are required by law to report abuse and neglect.
Would that be like a medical field or?
Yep, typically that's going to be anyone in the medical field, to include nursing home staff, anyone at the schools, basically any helping profession.
And when we talk child abuse, what ages are you working with?
All children. So, infants, even we will work with moms that are pregnant sometimes, given particular circumstances, all the way up to 17-year-olds.
Okay. This question, do parents ever get their children back after they're taken away from an abusive situation?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the common misconceptions out there is that, child protection knocks on your door and the child leaves with us, and that's actually not the case. The overwhelming majority of cases that we work, the children remain in the home with their parents. One of the things that I like to tell everyone about child protection is that the social worker doesn't actually have the legal ability to remove children. Law enforcement has that ability, and a judge has that ability via a court order. So even if we wanted to, we couldn't just show up at somebody's door and say, hey, the kids are coming with me today.
So are there obviously situations where you go with law enforcement when it escalates to a level that has to be done? Is that the way it happens?
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Sometimes law enforcement will get a call that a particularly bad situation is occurring. They might respond immediately to make sure that everyone there is safe, and then we are sometimes their very next call.
What factors do drug and alcohol play in child abuse or children living in abusive situations?
Unfortunately, that's probably the biggest thing that we're dealing with right now is drug and alcohol use. You always want to think that it's not happening in your community. I know prior to entering the child protection field myself, I said, oh, this is not happening. And in my town, that would be somewhere else. And then you really get your eyes open to, it does kind of permeate every level of our society, every socioeconomic status. There are people that struggle with addiction, and that oftentimes leads to negative impacts on their parenting.
Yeah, but, again, when you investigate it, how hard is it to, maybe because you talked about they don't like somebody's parenting versus are they really abusive?
Exactly.
How do you really determine that?
Exactly. We try to look at the impact of the child, so we know what it takes to raise children successfully. They need attention, they need to be loved, they need food, they need clothing, they need shelter. We look at those base level things, obviously that's the immediate safety part of it, but then we also have to keep in mind the well-being of the children. What does that attachment look like with their parents? How do the parents engage with them? Are they playing with a little child on the floor that wants some attention from mom and dad? We're trying to get our best assessment of what that looks like. Especially when it comes to things like, drug and alcohol use. I like to use the example of everybody has a couple beers during a Sunday Vikings game, right? Child protection's probably not going to come knocking on your door because maybe you had a couple extra beers too many on a Sunday. We don't look at the fact that the substance use is occurring. We look at how that substance use is impacting the parenting of the child and if there are any impacts that we can see.
Mm-hmm. Does that require multiple visits or,
Yeah, absolutely. So I said initially, we're going to get out within 24 hours or within 120 hours of a case being open. We're going to assess for that immediate safety of the child, but that isn't where it ends. From there, we're going to want to kind of identify who are the support systems that the family has in place. Are there relatives that we can kind of tap into? What are we really worried about? Oftentimes we'll get a report, for neglectful behavior, and we go talk to a family, and that's not something we're worried about at all. It might be something completely different. So we try to tap into the existing support networks of families to really kind of bring a village around a child, because that's what it takes.
It's one thing if to get a report, I guess, from a healthcare provider or a school counselor, but what happens when a neighbor somehow gets involved and decides they didn't like what they saw and they contact you? I mean, I assume you treat every case seriously,
Yep.
But so how do you follow up on those types of things?
Yep. So we accept reports from everyone in the community. You don't have to be a mandated reporter to make a child maltreatment report. You just have to be a concerned citizen. We really require or request that everyone call us if they're concerned for the safety or well-being of a child. Our guidelines that I spoke about earlier, they don't even allow us to take the credibility of a reporter into consideration when we're trying to determine does this report meet criteria or not. We consider that really good for child safety, but then it also becomes really frustrating from a family side of things.
Hey, I could see that too. How important are foster parents in this whole scenario?
Absolutely vital. Without foster parents, I think our entire system would collapse on itself. Oftentimes when children do have to go into custody, if they do have to be removed from moms and dads, we're going to be calling those foster parents right away. These kids need a safe and stable environment, and it's really the foster parents that are able to provide that for them. We try our best to reach out to family members. If moms and dads can't take care of kids, we want their family to take care of kids. So we'll traditionally, reach out to any family that exists in the area and say, hey, this is kind of the situation. The child did go into foster care, but we would like to, what we call emergency relative, license you to be the foster care provider. So the child doesn't have to go to a stranger's home or someone they've never met before. But without foster parents, we couldn't do what we do.
Yeah. Well, when you place a child with foster parents, how does that work? And is it for a night? Is it for a week? What is it?
Sure. We have what's called an on-call home. So for like the middle of the night calls when we're really not expecting anything to happen, we have a home that's ready to go that can take kids at any point in time. I feel our on-call home should be sainted for the service they provide to the children in our community. But essentially, we don't know. We don't know if we're going to be able to get the children back to their parents right away or if it's going to be more long-term.
Yeah. What about, discuss how the public views of child abuse have changed over the decades here?
Oh, absolutely. We will often reference this kind of in our office of, well, when we grew up, it was like this, and when we grew up, we did that. So I think the community standards definitely have changed over time, and I think they've changed in a way that ultimately are there to make kids more safe. But we do get into a lot of kind of generational conversations as to what's acceptable parenting practices. Typically that happens the most around supervision. What's okay is it okay for a kid to go play outside across the street at the park without a parent present, and at what age are they able to do that? I think that's where we get into the generational differences the most.
Well, and you say things have changed over the decades. Is spanking considered child abuse?
Well, that depends. In the state of Minnesota, you can use corporal punishment. You can spank your child. What we're really looking for is, was the action excessive or unreasonable? And we would consider an action excessive or unreasonable if it left a mark, if it left a bruise, if there was an injury as a result of that. I like to say I would often ask if parenting works for you, or if spanking works for you in terms of your parenting, then great. But I would just question, is there another more effective way that potentially we could help you understand or help you use better that doesn't involve, physically striking a child? Just because there's always a risk that you don't intend to leave a mark or a bruise and it happens accidentally. And that is enough to warrant a child protection response sometimes.
Yeah. Because even a spat on the hand when they're reaching for a burning stove,
absolutely,
are things that you wonder can you do. Is your job difficult at times?
Oh, absolutely. I'd say it's difficult most times.
So, what's the most rewarding thing about your job?
I think in general, when I got into the work, I believe a lot of families out there or community members in general would just, call us baby snatchers. That was one of the things I heard, completing investigations myself. And believe it or not, that's the worst part of our job, is when we actually have to remove children. So my favorite part of the job is when we work a case successfully where we don't have to remove the children, where we're able to keep kids safe and keep them in the homes with moms and dads, because we know kids do best when they're with their moms and dads.
Yeah. So what do you hope April, Child Abuse Prevention Month, will do for everybody out there?
I hope that just the community in general is able to just kind of recognize, keep an eye out for kids that they care about, and keep an eye out for kids that they see out in the community. If they think that something abusive or neglectful is happening, I hope that they remember that it's Child Abuse Prevention Month and to give us a call. I think oftentimes people think I can only call if I have something to report. That's not true. Give us a call if you have questions, if you don't know what to report, because we'd love to provide the community with any education to make everyone in the community as aware as possible so that all the kids in our community can be safe.
Yeah. With that said, if people want more information, where can they go?
Our website's a great place, claycountymn.gov. Otherwise, you could call our child intake line, 218-299-7139.
Well, Quinn, we're out of time, but thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Stay tuned for more. Though it's frequently touted as a fishing destination, Minnesota's Northwest Angle is so much more. It's an area rich with history, spectacular views, and oddities. Joe Lauren shares over 20 years of experience exploring and researching this magnificent place.
People think a Lake of the Woods is a fishing lake. It's sure a lot more than that. 14,000 islands on the lake. It's just amazing, some of the stuff that no one's ever seen. My wife Anita and I have been coming out to the Northwest Angle for 20 years, and she's a real outdoor person. And we kind of have a complementary interests where she loves to fish and I love to explore. Out just exploring things from old maps, old newspaper articles, just anything I could find. Over the years, 20 some years of exploring, I've had all this information. You know, over time I thought, why not share everything and let other people enjoy it? So I created a Lake of the Woods exploring app. If they want to see gold mines, if they want to see cool waterfalls, if they want to see good shore lunch spots, if they want to find good fishing spots, there was one place to go, and it kind of added another dimension to people's vacations. Each year I build on it. Probably have about 300 places to see on Lake of the Woods before I'm near complete. When you have over 50 gold mines on the lake, and there's, you know, so much there, you know, between the shafts and what they left behind and the elevators, even some of them, when you look in the rock, you could still see the gold specks where, yep, that's what they were interested in, and just all the work that had to be going through to put a hole in a rock just 10 feet. I can't imagine, you know, all the labor that went into that to create that, but the mines are definitely quite interesting. There's so many of them. So there are 3 sun sweeps that have been created by David John Barr. He's an artist from Michigan. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to bookend each side of the border between the United States and Canada. So he created a sun sweep in the state of Washington, one on Lake of the Woods, and then one in Maine. On the first day of summer, you'll actually see a reflection of the sun on the stone, and it follows the contour of the artwork. I know several different groups go out on the first day of summer and check them out. It's a pretty neat artwork. Cheerio Beach is very special. It has stones that have holes in the center that basically look like a Cheerio. No one really knows how they're formed, and a lot of people like to go there and create necklaces and bracelets, and it's kind of a cool place to visit, and you can never really leave there in less than a half hour because you find so many interesting things. It's pretty fun to go check out. A lot of people would come up to the Northwest Angle and try to take a picture. Oftentimes the picture was next to a road sign or something that really wasn't meaningful. So the local group got together and looked at different options, and one of the things they looked at was the Key West buoy. Key West has a buoy that kind of symbolizes the most southern spot of the U.S. So that the idea was have a similar buoy up in the northern parts. The people that come up to the angle just to take a picture of the most northern spot, that seems to be the best place to take the pictures from what we've had in the past. The Native Americans have a lot of history on Lake of the Woods. For instance, a lot of the petroglyphs that were created hundreds of years ago are still symbolic, where the different groups will go there and they'll leave offerings such as a coin, tobacco, different things to honor the legacy they had. What was the message back then that they were trying to send with the different, bird symbols, maybe medicine man, handprints? And there's some, like even the pictographs in my app, I'll look at. One's called The Long Journey. It shows a man in a squiggly line, and you look at Lake of the Woods and how you really can't go straight because of so many islands. And does that mean the long journey? Or what did that mean? So everyone kind of has their own interpretation. And I think that's what's kind of fun about the pictographs, because it's a language people don't understand. And you look at it and you're saying, boy, what does that mean to me? People up here want to do something different besides fishing and, add a little variety to their vacation.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse for this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. And by the members of Prairie Public.